Last time we've talked about the philosophy of vitalism, and I've briefly hinted at another philosophical view that stood in opposition to this philosophy. This is the famous philosophy of mechanism. Just like vitalism, mechanism has its root going way back in time, even as far back as the pre-Socratic era. In the 5th century BCE, Democritus and Leucippus theorized that matter is made up of tiny little particles they called atoms that are imperceptible and purely physical in nature. So, no need for hidden forces, invisible spirits, vital principles, or even divine guidance. He formulated it like this: by convention sweet, by convention bitter, by convention cold, by convention hot, by convention color, but in reality, atoms and void. What he meant was by convention is not made up in the trivial sense, but rather that terms like cold, bitter, sweet come through agreement about shared subjective experience. An individual atom on its own is not really cold or bitter. In the 4th century BCE, Epicurus came and took up atomism from Democritus, and he modified it somehow to account for human freedom, for human free will. And he did that by introducing the idea of the clinomen or paraklesis. Clinomen in Latin and paraklesis in Greek. So just like Democritus, he believed that atoms go in straight, deterministic path. But at no fixed place or time, an atom could make a slight deviation from its own original path, a swerve, and end up going on another path. This indeterminacy is what gave space from his perspective to account for free will. I personally find this very interesting because it's just like adding some random thing and acting as if like, yeah, that's what human freedom is. But despite these materialist trains of thought, it was really the Aristotelian teleology that dominated the Western mind for centuries. This is the idea that nature could be explained through purposes and ends. Fast forward to the 17th century scientific revolution where mechanism really gains ground. In his famous Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes argued that everything, even thought itself, could be explained in mechanistic terms. Everything is nothing but matter in motion. He even describes sensation as an interaction between the external object and our sense organs and our nerves transmitted into the brain. Imagination, he said, is nothing but decaying sense. It's a lingering motion inside the nerves and the sense organs after experiencing sensation. Even reason for Hobbes is nothing transcendent, nothing but calculations, adding and subtracting ideas just like numbers. At around the same time, Descartes published his Treatise of Man, in which he described the human body as an automaton, a self-moving machine. But unlike Hobbes, he didn't really reduce everything to mechanics. In his later works, he divided reality into two substances: res extensa, the extended substance, describing the body, matter, purely mechanical in nature, and res cogitans, which is the thinking substance, describing the mind, the human soul, which was immaterial in his perspective. Another interesting case like Descartes was Sir Isaac Newton. In his Principia Mathematica, he unified the heavens and the earth under one set of laws, Newton's laws of motion. From falling apples to orbiting planets, everything could be explained by the same mechanistic principles. This is the hallmark of mechanistic philosophy, because a reductionist or a mechanistic philosopher tries to find the most general principles that could explain the biggest number of phenomena that we can observe. Yet, just like Descartes, Newton was not a pure mechanist either. Although he had one foot in strict physics, he carried out his occult research on the side. He did a lot of research in alchemy, for example, searching for transmutation force. Transmutation force is a force that causes the cheap, uninteresting substances, materials to turn into the more sexy ones. He even wrote more on biblical prophecy and alchemy than on physics, which is crazy because Newton is the figure that's mostly associated with the mechanistic chain of thought. In his later works, he even argued that divine intervention was needed to keep the solar system stable. Now we enter the Enlightenment era, where Julien Offray de la Mettrie pushed mechanism to its radical extreme. In his 1747 book, Man, a Machine, he threw out Descartes' dualism completely. He directly argued that thought is just a normal brain function, just like any other bodily function. By doing that, and by denying the immortality of the soul, he got himself into great trouble, and his book was burned, and he went into exile because of challenging the Christian doctrine. Finally, in the early 19th century, Pierre-Simon Laplace delivered one of the boldest versions of mechanism. In his book, Philosophical Essays and Probabilities, he imagined the existence of a supreme intelligence, which was later called Laplace's demon. This intelligence, if it had knowledge of the position of every single particle in the universe, and had knowledge of the entire set of laws of physics, and possessed computational power, it would be able to predict the entire future of the universe and calculate its entire path. This was radical determinism, the universe as perfectly predictable machine, with no room for chance and no need for God. By the 20th century, mechanism became the default worldview, especially in the fields of physics, chemistry, and molecular biology. Today, it's just second nature to use mechanistic metaphors to describe living beings. The brain as hardware, DNA as code, evolution as algorithm. We are effectively living the reductionist dream. I personally tend to sympathize with reductionist ideas, but I find ideas like emergence very interesting. What about you? What do you think? If you think I've missed an interesting fact that could have been mentioned in this video, I would be so happy if you added in the comments like some nice person did in the last video. Or if you have ideas for future videos, then be nice enough to write them in the comments. This video exists because a very nice person motivated me to make this video. I hope you learned something and wish to see you around for future videos.